Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandham at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.
As I was rummaging through the archives of the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, I found this great episode we had on jersey number 4, the best players ever wore jersey number 4, with Dan Newman of Hello Old Sports Podcast, where Dan and I had a great discussion talking about the greatest number 4s in NFL history. Stay tuned.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Now to continue our quest to find the greatest players ever to wear each number jersey, we are going to go to our great interview we had with Dan Newman of Hello Old Sports. We have got a special treat today. We are going to talk about the jersey number 4, and we have a guest, Dan Newman. Dan is from Hello Sports Podcast on the Sports History Network. He and his brother Andrew have this podcast, and it's phenomenal. If you haven't listened to it, make sure you do as soon as you're done with this podcast, because they are two brothers, and they debate about sports. They love a good list. They grew up in the New York area, and they're just phenomenal sports addicts, and you can tell from their passion that they show, because they cover not only football but a wide range of sports. It's a very interesting program, and I'd like to bring him in right now. Dan Newman, welcome to the Pigpen.
Thanks, Darren. Really glad to be here.
Oh, we're happy to have you. We have the jersey number 4 as our topic of the day as we go through our journey of jersey number by jersey number. Started at 0s, we're working our way up to 99, and we're just getting started here. So we're glad to have you here to start talking about some number 4s.
I'm glad to be here. You were good enough to guest on our podcast, talk about Gale Sayers back in December on our In Memoriam series. So really glad to be a guest here, and looking forward to talking about some quarterbacks, kickers, and punters.
Yeah, it should be a good time. We got some good players on here, though, for number 4s. And what we're going to try to do, just to explain to our audience, we're going to put a compelling case together to come up with what we think our top number 4s of all time are. And it's mainly NFL we're going to be talking about. There might be a little bit touching in some other leagues, but not really the college game, because it gets kind of hairy there when you go into numbers there, because gosh, you can have 3 or 4 number 4s on one team, the way their rules go. So let's start off and talk about, we have 3 gentlemen that are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame that wore the number 4. So I don't know if we want to start off with them, I
think they're probably a good place to start, and I think really one of these guys is head and shoulders above the rest. It's the only one. If you were to say to anybody, name a football player who's associated with the number 4, I would say 95% of fans would take Brett Favre, all-time great passer, 3 MVP awards, all-century team, all of those things. So I think if you had to pick one, it would definitely be Brett Favre.
I think so, but I think it could be debatable. There's another one on the Hall of Fame list that played in a little bit different era that many may claim might have been as good or better than Favre, and that's Ernie Nevers. Ernie Nevers played in early football, and we'll get into a little more detail on him, but I could make a compelling case for him also.
I think you could, definitely. I think the one thing, Ernie Nevers, he was an inaugural Hall of Famer he was a part of the inaugural class of both the pro and college football halls of fame. I don't know what year the college football Hall of Fame opened, to be honest with you, but the pro football Hall of Fame was in 1963, and he was one of the...
I think it was 1954 was for the college football Hall of Fame. It was somewhere in the early 50s.
Nevers played 5 years, mostly with the Chicago Cardinals, but also a couple other places. When the NFL when the NFL about 10 years ago did their top 100 players of all time, he was 89th. And he doesn't often get talked about as much as guys like Jim Thorpe or Red Grange, but I think is just at least as far as NFL career, he had a much better career in the NFL than Jim Thorpe did. He played 5 years. He was an all-pro all 5 years. You talked about how our podcast, Andrews and mine, talks about all different sports, so would be remiss if I didn't mention that Nevers was also a pitcher for, I think it was the St. Louis Browns in the American League in Major League Baseball for 3 years. And then the other interesting thing about Nevers is he had a record with 6 rushing touchdowns in a single game, a record that stood, and it still stands, but he stood alone with that record from the mid-1920s, almost 100 years, all the way up until Thanksgiving of 2020, when Alvin Kamara tied that record as a member of the Saints. That was a great game, yeah, and it was funny. I remember watching that, and I said, I think that Ernie Nevers might have this record, and sure enough, he did. So I would probably still lean Favre, but I think you can make an argument for Ernie Nevers, definitely.
Well, let me bring a couple things out about Nevers that you didn't mention here. Okay, you did mention the All-Pro 5 times, and he only played 5 seasons in the NFL. I don't know if anybody has been that. I mean, it wasn't All-Pro; it was all NFL back then, but it's the equivalent of All-Pro. I mean, 5 for 5, that's pretty good. You talked about Thorpe. Well, there's a quote in the National Football Foundation's website on Nevers' bio that Hall of Fame coach Glenn Pop Warner coached him, also coached Thorpe, and he picked Nevers over Thorpe as his personal choice for the greatest football player of all time. I mean, that's college now he's talking, but still, that's pretty impressive because Thorpe had a much better college career than he did pro. The other thing is he was the star of the 1925 Rose Bowl. And he played for Stanford at the time. Stanford was playing Notre Dame when the Four Horsemen were playing, that famed year of 1925. And Stanford lost the game. Notre Dame won, of course. But he had more yards rushing than all 4 of the Four Horsemen combined in the Rose Bowl. So I mean, I know we're going back into college a little bit, but that's just sort of the background of this guy. He was a legend. And the other thing I really like about him, on the Pro Football Hall of Fame, I believe it might have been his enshrinement speech. Here's what he said: "I liked the way I played it. You went a full 16 minutes. We went from September to January and from Maine to Texas to the Pacific Coast. In all, we played 29 games and had only 16 men on the squad. If the coach took a man out of the game for a substitution, he got mad. That's how much we loved it." I mean, if that's not football, that guy is just, he's all in.
To be fair, that may be the reason he only lasted 5 seasons, is that he was playing both sides of the ball in 29 games a year. But
that'd be 130 games almost.
Yeah, that's a 10-year career these days.
Okay, let's go to Favre. Let's talk a little bit about him. Go.
Yeah, I have always thought, I've never been the biggest fan of Brett Favre. First of all, I think from a statistical point of view, I think he was a little bit of a compiler. There were those few years in the mid-'90s where he was really good. I think he won 3 MVPs in a row. He might have split one with Barry Sanders, as strange as that sounds, but I think in 90, 97 maybe he split one with Barry Sanders. So I've often thought that Favre does not belong on sort of the Unitas, Brady, Montana, Peyton Manning, that sort of upper tier. And I also don't like the way he went out with his career. He the 3 or 4 years of I'm going to retire, I'm going to come back, I'm going to retire, I'm going to come back. So I will fully admit to never having been his biggest fan, but in a lot of ways, just the crazy numbers that he put up and the fact that he was able to be a top-level NFL quarterback for, well over 15 years, I think those speak to themselves. He definitely had some years where he could have gone further in the playoffs and didn't, both with Green Bay and then later with the Vikings, but he is a great, great all-time quarterback.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing, okay, as good as he was with the Packers, do you realize his highest quarterback rating was his final year, 2009, with the Vikings? He had a 107.2 quarterback rating for that year, for pretty extended career. And that's, to me, that was kind of an unbelievable thing. I would have thought for sure it was 1995 or with the Packers. But, she started off with Atlanta, came out of Southern Mississippi, started off with the Falcons. It was a second-round pick. And they ended up trading him to the Packers. Holmgren really liked him up there, and you can see why. Holmgren sort of had some knowledge and the rest of us didn't, including the other 30-some coaches. And he replaced Don Majkowski in week 3 of that first season with the Packers and never looked back. It was a phenomenal career he had. Real gunslinger, as you might say. It's kind of very fun to watch. But he threw a share of picks, though.
And many of them were ill-advised.
Yes.
I think that was it that last year when he was with Minnesota, when in the, because 09 was New Orleans. Yeah, I think they were in the NFC Championship game in 09 against Minnesota, or against New Orleans, I should say, and Favre, late in the game when they could have just gone on for a game-winning field goal, instead threw a pass that he shouldn't have thrown. I think I'm remembering that correctly.
I think so.
And then they ended up getting it intercepted.
He did do that sometimes in his career. But that's one stat I love to look at with quarterbacks, is I love to look at their touchdown to their interception over their career. And Favre actually has a halfway decent one. He has 508 touchdowns, 336 interceptions. Not horrible. I mean, you'll see some of these other quarterbacks that we'll talk about are less of a percentage than that.
I guess I didn't think it was that. I didn't think it was that lopsided. I would have thought the numbers would have been much closer to each other for Favre.
I did too. I was kind of surprised because you think about him taking risks and throwing inopportune picks, but then he comes back with some great charge at the end of a game to make up for it. So that's what I remember a lot about Brett Favre.
I have a little, just a slight piece of trivia about Brett Favre and the first ever pass he ever completed in the NFL, and there's really two sort of interesting sort of factoids. First of all, he completed his first ever pass completed was to himself. It was a deflected pass that he grabbed out of the air and got for a -1 yard gain. And then the play-by-play guy that was doing the game for CBS was a guy by the name of Mike Emmerich, who listeners to football podcasts might not recognize, but his nickname was Doc Emmerich, one of the probably the most well-known and prolific NHL broadcasters of all time. And it was like one of the few NFL games he ever did, but I guess CBS had a bunch of games that weekend, and they needed somebody, so they threw Doc Emmerich in there. So Brett Favre's first pass completed to himself and called by a Hall of Fame hockey announcer.
Wow, that is some good trivia. That'll win somebody a free beer at the bar on trivia night one of these nights.
There you go. Hopefully one night soon, right?
Yeah, right. Okay, well, let's go to our third Hall of Famer, and that's Tuffy Lehman. And Tuffy played back in the early NFL. His career spanned from 1936 through 1943, and he was up in your neck of the woods. He was a New York Giant for his whole career.
He was, and it's one of those names you just hear of as a Giant fan. I'm not going to pretend that to be an expert in the career of Tuffy Lehman, but the Giants, as with a lot of teams, I think in the maybe like the 1950s, probably retired numbers at a greater clip than they should have, and I think all of a sudden people realized, look, we're an NFL team. We have 60 people on our roster. We can't be retiring all these numbers, and they stopped eventually. So, for instance, for the Giants, the only numbers they've retired anytime recently are Sims and LT, and I'd imagine they'll do Eli at one point. I don't even think they've done Strahan, but wow. Tuffy Lehman's has his number retired by the Giants. So if you go to a Giant game, or if you just look it up, he's one of the handful of numbers that are retired for the Giants. And, in fact, he and Favre are the only two guys that have number 4 retired. And Lehman's just like Ernie Nevers. He played both ways. He leads the Giants. He was an All-Pro in 1938, leads the Giants to the NFL championship, makes a couple of NFL title games throughout his career in 39 and 41. His rookie year, which I think was 38, he led the league in rushing, and even though the stats for this weren't really very good at the time, or they weren't not good, they were non-existent, a teammate of his says that Lehman's may actually have been better on defense than he was on offense, which for a guy with a name like Tuffy, you got to be good on defense. You got to be
right.
tough. So, yeah, I think a lot of times with these old football players, pre-1940, you're going more on word of mouth and sort of the remembrances of their contemporaries, and maybe to some extent also on how often they won. So Lehman's scores high marks in both of those areas, and so, a deserving Hall of Famer.
Yeah, he has kind of a real interesting story how he got on the Giants. I'm not sure if you've ever heard this one before, but he was playing at George Washington University, and he was a standout there, and didn't get a lot of notoriety in the press, but Tim Mara's son, Tim Mara was the founder of the Giants. His son Wellington Mara, who's very famous himself for being owner of the Giants, was vacationing as a high schooler. He saw Tuffy play at GW and came back and told dear old dad and the coaching staff about him. And lo and behold, they signed him that next year, and it was a good pick. So can thank Wellington Mara for that, the Duke.
Yeah, Wellington. Yeah, and he was he was there. It's crazy. Just Mara was there from those days all the way through to the early days of Eli Manning. So crazy. Ran the team well at times, ran it not so well at other times. But Lehman's was one of the ones he got right.
Right, and he's also got his nickname on NFL football too. That's called the Duke because of Wellington Mara.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think we can probably agree those three players, Favre, Lehman's, Nevers, those are in our top 5 definitely. And now we've got a sort of a mixed bag here. We've got probably the quarterbacks is probably who we want to talk about next, because there are some kickers, and there's some good kickers on there, but the kicker's not equivalent to the quarterback. They're not on the field as much. They're, not taking the hits that the quarterbacks are.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got 4 quarterbacks that are still playing that are worth mentioning, is what I have on my list. I don't know if you have anything differently there.
I think I may have only had 3 of them, so I'll be curious to hear.
Okay, well, one just wore 4 for a brief moment.
Oh, okay.
So it's my hidden gem. But who do you want to talk about first of our active quarterbacks at ward number 4?
Maybe because he's been so much in the news recently, I would start with Deshaun Watson.
Okay, that's a great one to start with.
Who knows where he'll be next year? But
right.
3 Pro Bowls in his first 4 years. Led the league in passing yardage this year, and has been to the playoffs a couple times. So wherever he ends up for the 2021 season and beyond, they'll be glad to have him. They'll be lucky to have him.
Absolutely. Yeah, he has, again, I like to go to that touchdown-interception ratio. And for a young player, he has 104 touchdowns so far, only 36 interceptions. So that's a pretty good ratio there for quarterback. He's just a phenomenal athlete and has instincts that are just off the charts. So I can see why every fan base in the NFL is clamoring for their team to trade for Deshaun Watson. And I personally don't think that the Texans are going to trade him myself, but that's just my own opinion. I think he's that valuable to him. How good of a player do you think he'll be? I mean, he's young right now. He's got the legs. He's known for that. What do you think he's going to be 5 to 10 years from now?
Ooh, I think he'll be good. He's already good. I think he'll be very good. I don't see him as sort of an all-time great. I don't see him on the level of some of the guys who are just leaving or getting ready to leave. Breeze, Roethlisberger, Brady obviously is his own case. He's certainly not as good as Sanchez. He had, Lamar Jackson's won an MVP. Watson hasn't, so I'd probably put Lamar Jackson a little bit above. I kind of envision Watson having sort of a Phillip Rivers-like career. Maybe he'll win more than Rivers, but a guy who's a good player on some good teams, probably not an MVP or a Hall of Famer.
Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, here's sort of where I see his path going a little bit. Traditionally, in the NFL, I can't think of too many examples that didn't follow this path, but young players that come in that have some great rushing yards, those rushing yards, as they get a little bit older and they take the hits and their bodies wear a little bit, they have to rely more on their arms than they do their legs that they did in their younger game.
Absolutely.
And I think he's got the tools to be a pretty good pocket passer. I think that's where he has an advantage more so over a Lamar. Definitely over, Michael Vick sort of struggled in that area when he had to get kept in the pocket. He was known for sort of what Deshaun does, but I think Deshaun just has a skill set and a knack for finding an open receiver, and he goes through his reads pretty well, and he makes outstanding throws too. I think he may survive and become a pretty good pocket passer as he gets a little bit older, and I think he may have the potential to make Hall of Fame. I don't think he'll be on the Breeze and Manning and Tom Brady and Joe Montana echelon, but I think he'll be in that next tier, I think. That's my personal opinion.
It's possible. It's definitely possible.
Well, there's a couple other interesting quarterbacks that we have that are currently playing. What do you think about Dak Prescott? He wears a number 4 with the Dallas Cowboys right now.
I like Prescott. I think he hasn't yet done much winning, which I wonder, I don't know, have they even made the playoffs in the time that he's been the starter? I want to just take a look at that. I guess his rookie year they were 13-3, so they definitely would have made the playoffs that year, and then 10-6 in 2018. So yeah, he's taken them to the playoffs. He won a playoff game in 18. I remember in 2016 when he was rookie of the year that year, and it was him and Ezekiel Elliott, both rookies, and there were talks that each of them was a candidate both for Rookie of the Year and for MVP. His rookie year may very well have been his best year when you combine not just the stats but the winning. I think that unlike Watson, the fact that Prescott has a team that he's with and a team that he's happy with, and he's also, presumably, he's got the running back as well in Elliott. I think that maybe he has a bright future ahead of him in Dallas if they can get the pieces around him. The other thing I like about Elliott is he was hurt a lot this year, but prior to that he was very, very durable. Very durable. For his first 4 seasons, he didn't miss a game, didn't miss a start. So I would say I like Elliott. In some ways, I'm more optimistic about him than Watson, actually. Even though I think Watson's probably got more skill, I like what Prescott has done in Dallas.
Right. It's interesting, like you said, 2016 the Cowboys were 13-3. He actually threw more yards. His best year was 2019. He threw over 4,900 yards, which is 1,300 more than he did his next best season. He had 30 touchdowns. Before that, his best was 23. That was his rookie year. And his touchdowns, 106, 40 interceptions. So he's sort of on par percentage-wise, real close to what Deshaun Watson is, both in their young careers. Real comparable numbers there. But I think you're right. Dak is, he's got some legs. He's not the speed demon that Deshaun Watson is or Lamar is. But if he needs to get outside and pick up some yards around the end, he can. But he's got a very accurate arm, and he's a very cerebral quarterback. I think for a young man in the NFL, he has some decent reads, and that doesn't have the big turnovers that you see some of the young quarterbacks make.
And as a Giant fan, I can speak to just how weak the NFC East is right now. So if he can get himself healthy, and if he can keep having some of these pieces around him, he's well positioned in the NFC East for the next few years.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I have one other quarterback I have two other quarterbacks that are active. One that plays quite a bit, and that's Derek Carr. Derek Carr of the Las Vegas Raiders. I have to be careful how I say that. I keep slipping up and saying Oakland.
He's already first all-time in passing yards all-time for the Raiders franchise, and that's a team that's had LaMonica and Kenny Stabler, guys that are in the Hall of Fame. Rich Gannon had a couple of years with crazy yardage. Carr is already, and he's been on the team for 7 years, so maybe I shouldn't say already, but he's first all-time in passing for Derek Carr. He's been to the Pro Bowl 3 times. Talking about durability, he's another one. He's only missed 2 games in his entire 7-year career, which is really impressive.
Wow. That is impressive.
I hate to put too much weight on this because he is still only one player, even if he is the quarterback. The fact that I don't believe he's ever been to the playoffs, has he? Derek Carr? I saw that he had a 12-3 record in 2016. So I find it hard to believe that they didn't make the playoffs. Maybe I'm just missing things, but I don't see any postseason stats on his stats page.
Yeah, I don't remember them being in the playoffs. But gosh, for 12-3, they had to be in the playoffs. You would think.
They lost to Houston in the first round in 2016, and I'm just looking.
Okay.
Maybe he was hurt.
Well, he only had 15 games, and so maybe he got hurt at the end of the season and missed the playoffs.
Their starting quarterback in this game was a guy I have to admit I have no recollection of, was Connor Cook. So don't know much about him. They lost to Brock Osweiler and the Houston Texans that year. But So I guess you can't really blame him for not playing in that game. He did lead the team to the playoffs. So I retract my criticism slightly, but nonetheless, even one playoff appearance in 7 years is not much to write home about. Yeah,
that's not. And I look at his touchdown to interception. He is. You can tell he's not quite what Deshaun and Zach or Dak are. He's 170 touchdowns, 71 interceptions. So I think that's sort of his moniker that's on him a little bit, is he'll try to feed a ball in where he shouldn't and takes the picks, and that's probably why the Raiders struggle from now and then. So Mr. Gruden is a quarterback whisperer, though. You'd think he would be having him come around a little bit here as his career goes on.
Yeah. Give him a couple more years with him.
And he actually has. He's picked his second year with Oakland, he had 32 touchdowns. This last year he had 27, and he was sort of in between. He was sort of on a roller coaster ride. So maybe Gruden's got him going in a positive direction. Now, here's my sleeper, who I said is a still active player, and this is kind of a surprise to everybody, but that's Ryan Fitzpatrick. And Ryan Fitzpatrick doesn't wear the number 4 now, but did wear the number 4 for 1 year in 2013 with the Tennessee Titans. So he probably doesn't have many stats with the number 4 on, but he still was an active quarterback on there. Now, how about
you mentioned? Go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going to say, you mentioned Andrew in my podcast, The Hello Old Sports. One of the things that we did recently, I think it was a few episodes ago, we did a Mount Rushmore of quarterbacks for every team in NFL history, and I think there were probably 4 or 5 teams or thereabouts where Ryan Fitzpatrick was like just missing the cut. He didn't make it onto the top 4 of any of the teams, but like for the Jets and for Miami and for Buffalo, and
he played the whole AFC East. I think he played.
Yeah, he's never been in New England, but other than that,
okay.
Yeah. So there were 3 or 4 teams where it was like, can we put Ryan Fitzpatrick on? So yeah, he's played on what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9 different teams. It looks like, and he may not be done yet. So he's also like only a month. He's only a month younger than me, a month older than me. So I want him to stay in the league so that there are still some NFL players who are older than I am.
I've heard some conversations on some talk radio and that about him, that he probably won't be a Dolphin next year. And I've heard some speculation, maybe the Colts or that was one of the teams I've heard mentioned. Trying to think who the other one is. Chicago Bears is another one that would take a lot of interest in him. But a lot of people are saying, though, too, that Mr. Tua down there really relied on Fitzpatrick, and it might behoove the Dolphins to try to re-sign him just to have that, sort of old guy on the sideline that can give you some good advice for your young quarterback starting out. So
he's kind of everything that a backup quarterback should be. He's able to go in for a couple games and just with his experience and his guile and the little bit of skill he's got left, he's able to win you a game or two maybe as sort of a nice change of pace. I mean, you think about it, he's a totally different quarterback than Tua. And also he doesn't seem to have much of an ego, so he's a good guy to mentor a young quarterback. So I think that he's kind of, if you're a coach and you're looking for a backup quarterback, you could do a lot worse than Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Right, and I think it was it this year or last year where he even showed at his advanced age he showed that he still had some wheels on him too to get around end and pick up some yardage, which was surprising. That goes against everything I said earlier about quarterbacks as they get older, being more mobile. Now I have only one other substantial quarterback on my list who's retired now, and I don't know if you have any other quarterbacks, but I have Trent Dilfer on it. Were the number 4 for 3 seasons when he was a Seahawk.
I did not have him on my list. I certainly don't think of him as a number 4. I think of him as a number 12, especially in that one year with Baltimore where they beat the Giants in the Super Bowl, which I still am pained by. So I did not have Dilfer on my list. I did have one other retired quarterback, unless you had something else you want to say about Dilfer.
No, please.
The only guy I had was Jim Harbaugh.
Okay, yeah, I forgot about him.
Later the coach of the 49ers, and he was sort of the quarterback in Chicago in the last few Ditka years. I think, I don't want to swear to this, but I think he made the playoffs once or twice with Chicago, and then he was also the quarterback on this 95 Colts team. It was the only time Harbaugh ever made the playoffs, and it was this Colts team that kind of came out of nowhere, and I remember watching this game as a kid.
Oh, you're starting to hit a sore subject. I'm a Steelers fan. I can feel the knife going in a little bit.
But it shouldn't be a sore subject because you guys won, and there was a play, and I think it was a controversial play in the end zone, if I'm remembering correctly.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because wasn't that play part of the reason why they brought replay back?
That is one of the reasons, yes, because Harbaugh threw that desperation pass from like his own 40 to the end zone. His man got up over top of the DBs for the Steelers, who were obviously all back in the end zone waiting for it, and he got his hands on it, started to bring it down, and it just fell to the ground. Actually, when it happened real time, it looked like he caught it because his body sort of shielded the ball from the viewer. And this is a year after the Steelers had lost the AFC Championship game to the Chargers and Stan Humphries, if you remember.
That's right.
That game.
That's right.
And so you just got that sick feeling in the pit of your stomach as a Steeler fan when you watch that. Oh no, it can't happen again, can it? Not this way. But it did fall to the ground. But yes, that's one of my main things I remember Harbaugh as a player. And that quarterback room, when he was a Chicago Bear, they had 4 pretty notable quarterbacks on that team. You of course had Jim McMahon. You had Harbaugh. I'm trying to think. The
backups for McMahon were Steve Fuller.
That's the one
and
I was
Mike
thinking.
Tomczak.
Yes, Tomczak.
In 85. And then in 86, they brought in Doug Flutie. And it was like all of a sudden they had 4 quarterbacks. They had McMahon.
Did they have Evans too? Mobile.
I think that was earlier. That was the early 80s.
Okay.
Evans was the early 80s. I think he was before McMahon.
Okay.
But the one year they had the 4 of them, and then the following year they drafted Harbaugh, I think, in the first round. So crazy quarterback controversies. And, Jim Harbaugh right in the middle of it. But so he was the only other retired quarterback that I had on my list. The rest of mine is kickers and punters.
That's what I have also. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Harbaugh. We don't want to forget him. Well, we have probably one of the top kickers ever to play was a number 4. And I don't know if you want to bring him up. Go ahead.
Vinatieri, 48 years old, and third oldest player of all time behind George Blanda, and the second person escapes me at the moment. And I think there's talk that he might try and come back again next year. He's at least considered. Now, he's been really kind of on the decline the last couple years, but there's at least some talk that he might come back and try and play next year. He made it to – he's kicked in, I want to say, 6 Super Bowls. Everybody remembers him the first 3 years of the Patriots dynasty with Belichick, but he was actually the kicker on the Parcells team that lost to Green Bay in 96. Okay. I think that was either his rookie year or his second year. He kicked game-winning field goals in the first 2 Super Bowls that the Patriots won. I believe he's the only guy who scored 1,000 points for 2 different teams, Indy and New England. And he was one of the 2 kickers on the NFL 100 team last year with Jan Stenerud. Or no, was it Stenerud or it might have been one of the Andersons? But either way, Vinatieri was one of them. And
I think it was Stenerud.
Was it Stenerud?
Yeah, I think so.
I gotta say, I think Vinatieri's going to the Hall of Fame. If you're going to put a kicker in the Hall of Fame, and they've let a couple of them in, you got to put Vinatieri in.
I totally agree. I mean, he was a great kicker with the Patriots, and then back in that era, back when Peyton Manning was still playing, he ended up leaving the Patriots with Tom Brady and going to the sort of the nemesis of the Patriots, the Indianapolis Colts and Peyton Manning. And I mean, he still had a great career with the Colts even till he might have stayed a year or 2 longer than he should have. Probably last year was probably not his best season of statistically. He had a couple real bad key kicks that he missed that would have won his team another game or 2, I think.
Yeah, I remember there was the one game where he was like, you almost got the impression that he was planning to retire the next morning. He's like, well, I got to go home and assess this. And then he ended up sticking around not only for that, but also for all of this year. So
yeah, that's true.
Who knows?
That's true. Yeah, I'm hoping maybe he retires because I'd want to remember him the way he was with the Patriots in his early Colts days. A few more kickers on here that are worth mentioning. I'm not sure if Jason Hansen, John Casey, Phil Dawson, Dean Biasucci, Jay Feely, and Neil Rackers is who I have as sort of rounding out the kickers that were substantial.
I was a little more parsimonious with the kickers than you did. The only 2 that I had down on my list to talk about were Hansen and John Casey.
Okay.
Hansen 21 years with the Detroit Lions, and I guess he must have just found a place where he liked to be, and they respected him, and he must have liked living in the Detroit area, and I don't know what his situation is, but maybe he had a family, maybe he had kids in school, whatever. Like, it's weird that a guy would spend that much time with the Detroit Lions and not at least try to leave. But
don't you think that maybe a dome a dome is a very friendly place for a kicker, and it
that
seems
could have been part of it too.
It gives them some longevity. I mean, Vinatieri going to Indianapolis. Gary Anderson, who left the Steelers and I think the Giants, and did he play for the Giants? Maybe not. Maybe Anderson didn't. But what goes to Minnesota and has a brilliant career at the end of his career.
Morton Anderson in Atlanta.
Right. Those are. I think the domes are very friendly to the kickers.
That's a good point too. Hansen is the all-time Lions leader in points by over 1,000 points. There's only one other guy, and that's Eddie Murray, the Lions kicker, who was the kicker for the 12 years before Hansen. So they had two kickers basically for over 30 years.
Wow.
Murray is the only other guy with over 1,000 points besides Hansen. So Hansen leads every other scorer in Lions history by a margin that's more than those people even have. So in other words, 2150 for Murray, 2150 for Hansen, 1113 for Murray, and then 768 for the next guy down. So Hansen's got everybody but Murray beat by a good, almost 1,400 points, which would be enough to be the leader in the first place. So
right, that's impressive. That is impressive. Great career.
And then this sort of similar with John Casey. He wasn't there for as long. Best known as the longtime Panthers kicker, and he's their all-time points scored leader as well.
But he ended up having 20 seasons all in. I mean, not all with Carolina, but he had 4 with Seattle and 1 with New Orleans after that. So he was real close with the 2 decades of kicking.
Absolutely.
But yeah, some good players there. I have one punter I think that's worth mentioning that wore number 4, and that's.
I actually had 2.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay.
I did.
Well, I had Reggie Roby. I thought he was a great great punter for his time. Time was mostly, I believe, with the Dolphins. I just remember he led the league a few of those years with his punting statistics and really put offenses of the opposition into some tough spots with his accurate punting. So I thought he was worth mentioning in our list.
Yep, he's on the All-1980s team. He's a 2-time All-Pro. The worst game of Roby's career was probably Super Bowl 19 against the 49ers. He had a horrible punting day against the 49ers, so much so that Shula mentions it in the post-game. He said, we have a really good punter, but we didn't have a really good punter today. So how often do you hear a coach who loses a Super Bowl mentioning the punter as a reason why they lost? So, yeah, a guy I remember sort of as a young football fan, Reggie. When you ask somebody to name a really good punter, Reggie Roby was the guy who you often would mention. And then the other guy I had was Brad Maynard, who was, and I believe he was a number 4, unless I'm.
He's a number 4.
He was a punter first with the Giants, and then later with the Chicago Bears. Giants drafted him in the 3rd round in 1997, which is high for a punter. Now, he didn't actually wear number 4 with the Giants. He wore number 9, but he wore number 4 with the Bears from 2001 to 2010. Selected in the 3rd round, he leads the NFL in total punting yards 3 times, and then going back for the 2nd time to that horrible Super Bowl 35 where the Giants were annihilated by the Ravens, Brad Maynard has the record for the most punts by a punter in a single Super Bowl, which just gives you an idea of how terrible the Giants' offense was that day. And then after that season, he goes to Chicago, punts for another 10 years, and that's where he wears number 4. So just one other that I thought was worth a mention.
I agree. All right, well, I think we've sort of put a compelling case for all the substantial players, covered basically three position groups that would wear the number 4 in this day and age, and even some that in the olden days before they had the numbering restrictions. And I think if we want to try to round it out to let's say a top 5, we already said we're going to put Favre and Ernie Nevers and Tuffy Lehman's in there because they're Hall of Famers. They sort of get that automatic nod. Who out of all our other people, who do you think should be our other 2 gentlemen that join them?
I would say you have to have Vinatieri because he's probably going to the Hall of Fame, and he's quite possibly the best kicker of all time. So
yeah, that's a good point.
I would say you have to put him on there. And then after that, I mean, it's probably one of these three modern quarterbacks, right? Carr, Prescott, or Watson.
That's who I have it sort of narrowed down to, too. So you almost got to pick who you think the best of those three are. And they're all comparable. Well, let me say this. I think probably Derek Carr, just based on his statistics and his win-loss, is probably a little bit below where Dak Prescott and Deshaun Watson. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would agree with you there. So
it's sort of a two-horse race here between Dak and Deshaun. Very comparable numbers.
I'm going to say Prescott because I think he's... Oh, jeez. Now I'd probably say Watson. Watson's numbers are more eye-popping. Even though I said...
Darn it, I thought we were going to have a debate because I was going to go on that Watson fence. Oh, boy.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I could make the case for Prescott, I think, but I think the case for Prescott is that he's won a little more... And I think he's better positioned going forward to win. But if we're just basing it on sort of current resume, I would say Deshaun.
Okay, I would agree with that. So just so we have it for the record, Dan and Darren are going to say that we have Favre, Lehman's, Nevers, Vinatieri, and Deshaun Watson as our top number 4 jersey wearers of all time in the NFL. That's as it stands in 2021 here. Now, I'd like to change gears here a little bit to wrap up the show. And first of all, we appreciate you coming on here today and having this discussion with us. But we want to hear a little bit, for the listenership of the Pigskin Dispatch, a little bit about your Hello Old Sports. What can you tell us about that? What would a listener expect to hear?
A little bit of everything. You mentioned in the intro that Andrew and I grew up in New York, and so there are a lot of episodes, or not a lot of episodes, but there have been some episodes that have had more of a New York bent. Our most recent episode was Super Bowl 25, where we kind of went through the whole game. That was when the Giants beat the Bills 20-19 in 1990 season, 30 years ago. So that's sort of one sort of episode where we kind of look back at a specific topic, and then we do a lot of lists. We did the Mount Rushmore of quarterbacks. Early on we did a couple of baseball theme where we did sort of all-time rosters for the Yankees and for the teams that played in New York in the National League. So we've done that type of thing. We've done a few sort of deep dives into specific topics. We talked about 1920 in sports. We did a couple early on where we talked about boxing and sort of the history of the heavyweight boxing title and what it used to mean, what it means now, that type of thing. So really, it's very eclectic. I mean, and it's ironic given what just happened a couple days ago in the Super Bowl, but right around the time, right around the fall when the Rays were in the World Series and the Bucks were riding high with Brady and the Tampa Bay Lightning had won the Stanley Cup, we did an episode about the history of sports in Tampa Bay.
Well, you got a couple of Nostradamuses here.
We got an episode. We're trying to do a little more basketball in February because we've kind of neglected that. We've got an episode coming up with a guy who wrote a book about the Knicks in the 90s, so we got that coming up in a couple weeks. So we're really sort of all over the place. And the one other thing that we did that I really enjoyed doing, and we spent a lot of time putting it together, and this Darren was good enough, along with a few of the other hosts on the Sports History Network, to jump on with us. It was 3 episodes throughout December. It was an in memoriam thing where we talked about several dozen of the players and coaches and others who'd passed away during the year. And some were guys like Gale Sayers or Tom Seaver or Whitey Ford, guys you've heard of. But then we also talked about Ken Riley, or we talked about Jim Nielsen from the Rangers hockey team, some of the lesser-known guys. So that was something we did that had a lot of fun. So a long-winded answer to your short question is that we really do a little bit of everything. we tend to have sort of Army football. That was another one. We did a couple episodes on Army football.
I was going to mention that. That was probably one of my favorites that you've done. And I'm not an Army fan. I'm not from that area, but I mean, it was outstanding, the history that I didn't realize that happened with Army football. That was a great show, and I love that tribute that you did that 3-part series too.
Thank you.
And I was honored to be a part of that. But great way that you presented it and honored those folks that had fallen in the year 2020 in sports history. That was a great tribute to them, and we're very appreciative. And we are very appreciative that you joined us today.
Absolutely.
And you said you got some basketball coming up in the future. Anything else coming up that we can look for from the Hello Old Sports?
We got some basketball coming up. Everything from the other thing that we're doing, and we did the basketball one, and we're doing the football one next. I don't know when that's actually going to be. It might not be until April or May, but we're looking at sort of rival leagues. So for football, that would be the AFL, but then also the AAFC.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll talk about even going to like the World Football League, and then the XFL. Both
got version 3 coming up this year.
Version 3, exactly. Yeah. So both previous iterations, and then the next one. So that's another thing we're looking at. I always, I live in D.C. now, and the joke is if you don't like the weather in D.C., just wait 5 minutes. And I kind of think the same thing applies to our podcast. If you don't want to hear about the Patrick Ewing Knicks of the 90s, wait till next week, because you'll probably be hearing about some Super Bowl or some baseball player from 1915. So we're just all over the place.
It's outstanding, and like I said, if you haven't listened to Hello Old Sports, you really have to do yourself a favor and give it a listen, because it is great. As well as we have, I believe, 17 different podcasts on the SportsHistoryNetwork.com.
We're really growing.
Yeah, every time I say that, I look and Arnie Chapman does some great work over there. He adds 1 or 2 more. I just said it last week. We had 15, and somebody commented to me, "Hey, you didn't look. Sports History Network has more now." I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Jeez, that's great.
Yeah, so sometimes under the cover of the night, we have another podcast coming on. It's some great hosts there for everybody to listen to, including Dan and his brother Andrew on the Hello Old Sports. And Dan, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll look forward to listening to.
Darren, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
What a great discussion that was on the number 4s. We certainly had a great time doing it and talked about some great football players that wore that number 4. Very interesting indeed. And make sure you join us in a couple of days. We're going to go over the number 5 jerseys. Probably be a solo event, just me talking about them. We'll try to come up with a list with number 5s on there. And if you make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your podcast player right now, so you can know as soon as the next edition is released. And we're going to do some football history headlines this week. We're going to talk about some more numbers, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the Sports History Network and have some more great hosts of that great organization join us with my partners here. So make sure you check them out, sportshistorynetwork.com, and listen to all those other great podcasts we have. And, of course, we have our flagship website, pigskinddispatch.com/podcast, and you can listen to all the podcasts of the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch. And until tomorrow, everybody, have a great Gridiron Day. Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskinddispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskinddispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. A special thanks to the talents of Mike and Jean Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
At the Sports History Network, we're all about sports yesteryear, and so we're so pleased to introduce you to Row One, an online memorabilia gallery and shop that brings your sports history to life anywhere. The Row One gallery includes over 5,200 gorgeously reproduced prints of team posters, game program covers, game tickets, advertisements, and more in baseball, pro and college football, pro and college basketball, and more. And any gallery item may be printed in a variety of sizes on wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. And in Row One shop, check out the thousands more of unique items with the retro and historical designs dating back to 1876, including t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, phone cases, mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com, ROW1, for access to the full Row One catalog and for gallery prints and gift items, plus get a 15% discount off all prints on the Row One Pictorum Gallery with coupon code SHN15. Follow the link on the show notes.